Toida Magino Matzli, we have more say too. Okay. Kumlen about Gemara, we are up to Daf Nun, Amid Aleph. We're almost at the end of the Masechta. Next week already we finished the Masechta. So in the Gemara over here, we're still talking about Nisach Hamayim, and we said that they put it into, and if it falls on Shabbos, they draw the water and they put it into a keli which was not consecrated on Friday, and then on Shabbos they perform the Nisach Hamayim. And then the Mishnah concludes, but if the water, let's say, spilled out or it was left uncovered, and then you cannot use this water and you have no choice of Shabbos, so they use the water from the kiyah. What's the problem is left uncovered? That a snake might have drank the water overnight and left behind some venom. And Rashi learns the problem is that since you have a certain, if you hold it, you have to have a certain amount of water. You have the minimum amount, let's say 3 lugin. Then if now the poison replaced some of that water, you're missing from that shear. The Gemara concludes there's places I've actually not found in the first place, and that is because it's inappropriate, it's not pasig, it's not suitable in the base of English to use water that has venom in it. Anyway, it says the Gemara, you're telling me that it was uncovered and the snake left some venom behind. But why? Leaven, Mishanana is used a kind of a strainer that will hold back the poison. Must be lema masnis in the lake of Nechemia. Then we can only conclude that our Mishnah will not follow the view of Rav Nechemia, which is what Tanya we learn misanenes that even though you use a strainer, nevertheless it is forbidden. It is forbidden, and because it cannot hold back all the poison, and it is forbidden. Says when is that talking about? This is talking about. Okay, so this basically what it is that they used to place wine. They used to place wine in a pot where there's a strainer, and on top of the strainer they used to put all kinds of different spices and herbs with nice fragrances, and they'd pour the wine through that. And actually, it's like cognac they used to make, and that's how the wine took on or absorbed some of those fragrances. And what happens is that the strainer holds back all of these spices, and only the wine pours right through. So that's the Misanenis. So the first opinion says, nope, this gili doesn't help. Even though if you left it exposed overnight, it doesn't help because the poison might be able to go through. Or because a snake can go underneath the strainer and still drink from the wine directly. And then it's obviously forbidden. Comes along in the Chemish depends. It's also talking about if the wine where it ends up in the bottom is also there's exposure, there's place for the snake to wiggle its way in and drink some, then it's forbidden. You have like 2 layers, and there's a pot on top and a pot on the bottom, and the pot on the bottom is completely covered. It's only from all sides, and there's a strainer on top of that so you can get through, and then there's a pot on top where you pour the wine and you keep this in the different spices. He says because the snake cannot get directly in the water. And what about the venom? The venom can go through because the venom is something that flows to the top. He said because since venom flows to the top, it won't go through the strainer and go down to the bottom. Because he says the anas. The venom of the snake, is like a sponge. It floats on top and it stays in one place. And therefore, the strainer holds it back. It doesn't go through. That's what he says. So the Al Mishnah doesn't give an option. It would seem to say that Al Mishnah holds that it's still forbidden, even though there's a cover on it. So the Gemara, no. When I say it's all right for an ordinary person to drink it, it's safe. But in the base of Mikdash, it's much more issue than just being safe. But when it comes to the base of Mikdash, it's not just a question of safe; it's a question of what's dignified. Because doesn't he believe in the pasuk that we quote all the time? Will you serve this up? Excuse me. Will you serve this up to your officer? And if you did, Hayitzach will be happy, or Hayisa Panecha will he show favor to you? Amar Hashem said, how can you bring such an item into the Beis HaMikdash and make a mitzvah out of it? Therefore, it's inappropriate, even if it's safe. Now we come to the last Pedic, all about the Simchas Beis HaShe'eva. So they used to play a special instrument, the Chalil, a flute. They always played instruments of Beis HaMikdash, but the flute is special when it comes to Simchas Beis HaShe'eva. We'll learn in Gemara Erchin that it's 12 days a year they used to play the flute. And the flute is the only one that's mentioned amongst all the musical instruments because the flute is the loudest. It seems that the flute was the loudest. So Hachalil, sometimes Chamisha, sometimes they used to play it 5 days, and sometimes Shisha 6 days. This is to do with Simchas Beis Hasha'eva. What we're talking about the flute of the Simcha Beis Hasha'eva. They did this to increase the Simcha by the Beis Hasha'eva. According to Rashi, this is a din in the Nitzach Hamayim. It's a din in the Simcha Beis Hasha'eva. According to the Rambam, it's a din in Simcha of Yom Tov. Sukkot, it says 3 times Simcha, therefore it needs extra Simcha, and that's why they play these musical instruments. And they used to play these instruments, the machlekes and the farshim, and more later we'll see which way it goes. Whether we're talking about at night when they used to draw the water, or we're talking about during the day in the morning when they brought the korban tamid, they used to actually pour the water. But anyway, the idea is that if Shabbos they would not go ahead and play these musical instruments, even though it's only a Shavuos. Only Easter Rabban. What's wrong with playing musical instrument? You might end up fixing it up. Still, it is forbidden. Taisa says because it's not only it's not an avodah, it's not even to enhance the avodah. It's purely the simcha yesera, to add more joy. Others say, if we're having our even towards the end, that there are different levels and grades of shavusim. Some shavusim, many shavusim, were not concerned with in the base of Mikdash because Kohanim knew what they were doing and were diligent. But there were certain shavusim, if it's we had about making a bow and versus a knot. So over here, if an instrument breaks down, to repair it is something that seems quite often in those days. Therefore, it's considered a grave shvus or a very strong, a severe shvus, and therefore, even the base of Mikdash, they wouldn't counter it. So sometimes it's 605, depending. If the first day of Sukkot is on a Shabbos, then you have 6 days Chol Hamoed, so 6 days. If any other day falls on a Shabbos, it's only 5 days. In other words, we did not go ahead and blow these instruments on Shabbos. Sheidoich Shabbos a Yom Tov. We did doich that Shabbos, and we weren't doich, nor we doich in Yom Tov as well. Says the Gemara, Itmar Rav Yehuda Ravina, there's an Agra Rav Yehuda Chatani Shoyeva. One of them called it Shoyeva, Simchas Beis HaShoyeva, the Chatani Chashuva. The other one called it Simchas Beis Chashuva, the Chashuva, the most significant event. Amazut Mandatory Sheva Mishtav, one says Sheva is not making a mistake, nor is Mandatory Chashuva Mishtav mistake. Chashuva also is not making any error. What do you mean? Mandatory Sheva, when you use the word Shoyeva Lemishtav, the Chsiv it says Usha after Mayim, you should draw water besasan with joy. So therefore, it's an appropriate term, and that's what's called Simchas Beis HaShe'eva, is the place, the location where they did it, and it's called the drawing of the water, because that's what the pasuk says. Shafta Mayim Besasan. Toni Chashuv, the one that says that we'll call it, and this particular activity is considered very significant. Let me start. Also make a mistake. Mitzvah Chashuvahi is a very significant mitzvah. The shisim, the shoots that they poured down, started from Sheshim Mebreshis, even though they did every day with the wine, but the water was something you did only a couple of days a year, a few days a year. Therefore, became a very important event, and it's called Chashuva because it was there for Sheshim Mebreshis. And so, what's the word she'eva? Sicha she'eva. So Rashi, the Gemara seems to say because we drew water. Jesus brings to the Shalmi that it's called she'eva because people used to draw ruach hakodesh from that event. Because the Shechina does not rest only when people are really happy. That by Levim it says Vatihi Kemenagah when they started playing the instrument. Only then Vatihi Olav Ruach Hashem was able to prophesy. So you have to be very, very happy. And Tesis brings the famous Shalmi that Yoina. And by the way, it's a big controversy when exactly Yoina ben Amitai that we're going to read in Kippur, when exactly did he live? But Yoina ben Amitai, how did he become a Navi? He was Oile Regel, and by Simchas Beis HaShe'eva, obviously he danced very, very well, and he was really, truly enjoyed Simcha. So that's why the Shechina rested on him. So what we learned. Chalil, in fact, we have an argument. We have someone who argues on Mishnah. Doiches Shabbos. Divrei Rabbi Yosef. You hold that the flute did push away Shabbos, and the Chachamim af Yom Tov. Not only couldn't you blow it on Shabbos, you cannot even blow it on Yom Tov. So the Gemara will explain what's going on. And just a quick introduction. We know that you play musical instruments. There's two ways of understanding the role that musical instruments had in the base of Mikdash. Is that Levim, their role was to augment or to enhance all the kabbanas by singing. The question is, what's the Ika Shira? Is the Ika Shira bepeh, vocal? The singing is made, and the music there is purely as a background. right? To enhance it, or Ikashir is Bekeli. The main music is actually the music, and the voices are there perhaps. Firstly, you have to say this, the words, the parakim, but the voice also, melodious adds to it. But the Ikashir is Bekeli. So that's the question here. The flute, is that an avoida, or is that just there as an enhancement? So we'll see in a minute. Amar Rabbi says, in fact, I believe that it's precisely the machlekes between Rabbi Yossi and Yehuda says you do play it on Shabbos, and the Chum they don't. Machlekes b'shir shekarban. They're arguing about when they used to sing by the carbon, they used to play music by the carbon, and they're arguing what. First of all, they're not talking about the flute by Sukah Daf, they're talking about the flute by the carbon during the Nisach HaMayim activity itself. Remember we learned that Nisach HaMayim is done every morning when they brought the carbon tamid. And the Levim would stand there on their platforms, and they would say a shir. They would say the certain prokim shir shayim, and there were 12 days a year that were so chashuv that they used to play the musical instrument by the mizbech, and so on. So the question is the musical instruments played at that time, what role did it have? So Rabbi Yossi holds ikashir b'kli. Rabbi Yossi holds the main music is musical instruments. So therefore, it's like we know that a korban tzibur requires a share from the Torah, and Gemara Echen has this whole discussion there. And Rabbi Yossi holds when we know we need a share means playing musical instruments. So therefore, and all the instruments, the harp, whatever it was, including the flute. And I told you we mentioned the flute because that's the loudest of them all. Therefore, it's considered an avodah, and anything which is avodah, it pushes away Shabbos, because in the base of Mikdash they did all the avodas on Shabbos. So avodah he v'doich Shabbos. But Rabban hold no, ikar shira b'peh. Rabban hold when the Torah insists that you have to have shira by a carbon, they're talking about the Levim should sing and say a certain prokim from Tehillim on a daily basis. But the musical instruments is not that part of the avodah, so therefore it not only doesn't push away Shabbos, it doesn't even push away Yom Tov as well. What about when it comes to the playing the music, when it comes to Sukah Daf, which is definitely not an avodah, then everyone agrees it's only there to add more simcha, and therefore you have no right to play it even on Yom Tov. As a Shabbos, and surely it's not Deicha Yom Tov. So they used to stand all night long on the steps. We'll see later on the steps dividing the Ezras Yisrael and the Ezras Noshim. And the Levim will stand there with their musical instruments, and they will play all night. So all it is, it's not an avodah, it's not an Torah, it's only a simcha yeseda, which is a machlekes Torah and Rabbanan, but whatever it is, it's not an avodah.
If they were there all night,
yeah.
Sorry for interrupting. Then how would snakes get there? Snakes basically keep away from people.
Yeah, but they were in one area, and when they left, the snakes were only worried about Friday night. Remember? They drew the water on Friday, and Shabbos morning they would come in and they would use that water. That's the only time we're worried. All other occasions they were never worried. You're right. Says the Gemara. How do I know about pligi? How do I know that the whole argument revolves around whether the main shit is the pet or with musical instruments? The Tanya we learned in the Brisa. That we know that all the clay sharis, every keli, every vessel that they used in the base of Mikdash was consecrated and became holy and sanctified all the contents inside. And we learned from the menorah, what's considered clay sharis, the materials. What about a wooden keli in the base of Mikdash? Do we have any precedent for a wooden keli at all? Because if we do, then we would say wooden kelim also become holy, sanctified, sacred. But if we don't find any precedent for a wooden keli in the base of Mikdash, no, the only wooden thing that had a base of Mikdash was the flute that was used at that time was made out of wood. In fact, we had the Gemara Echen, they tried to coat it with gold because they thought it was inappropriate to have a wooden flute, and the sound was deteriorated. So they removed the gold and the sound came back. So they left the flute as a wooden keli. So the question is, do we draw parallels to the flute or not? So if you view the flute, the activity of the flute as an avodah, a service in the base of Mikdash, then we had a wooden keli servicing the base of Mikdash. But if you say it's purely to as a background, but it's not really the avodah, then we have no precedent for any wooden keli. And we have that argument. So he says, just like we have the argument there regarding wooden keli, I would say therefore, and that revolves around the question whether musical instruments was an avodah or not, I would say the same argument would apply to whether you blew the flute on Shabbos or on Yom Tov, or was no Yom Tov, but on Shabbos, by Sukah Daf. How do I know that? It's how we learn Kli Shadosh was made out of wood, and that'd be paisel. Rebbe said, how can you have a wooden keli inside the base of Mikdash? Rabbi Yisrael, my lab, what's the focus of their argument? But how come if there's their argument? Man, the one who says you can use wooden ones, which is Rabbi Yisrael Bar Yehuda, the same Rabbi Yisrael Bar Yehuda that we talked about before on Sukkahs. So, but he holds Ikashira B'Kli, a musical instrument is part of the Avodah, and therefore, because it's Ikashira, how do you put singing? The Torah wants singing means music. The Alfina Mabub, the Moshe learned from the flute of Moshe that was made out of wood. So since we would hold that wood was an avodah, the flute of Moshe was an avodah, therefore he says it pushes away Shabbos. Uman the apostle, but the one who says that you cannot blow flute on Shabbos, he would hold like Rabbi Soba, he would hold that the main singing is vocally, not the usual instrument, so we have no precedent for wooden keli in the Beis Mikdash. I mean, that's how we learn it. Say, well, no. Everyone agrees. Everyone says the Ikashira is with a musical instrument. I can give you two different ways of learning, and that I can say that the argument regarding the flute has nothing to do, it's totally unrelated to the argument regarding Kalim in the Beis Hamikdash, and the argument regarding the flute, whether it pushes away Shabbos or not. We can learn one of the following two ways. Either everyone agrees that musical instruments play a vital role in the Ikashira B'Kli. So in fact, if everyone holds it's Ikashira B'Kli. When it comes to this argument about wooden kalim, no, your whole proof that that's the argument of our Gemara by the flute is based on the argument regarding wooden kalim. And you decided that the argument, the crux of the argument regarding wooden kalim, whether they're sacred or not, depends on the flute, the role of the wooden flute that Moshe Rabbeinu had. That's what you decided. I can learn that their argument has nothing to do with that. In fact, I can learn the argument either they all agree that the wooden flute was an avodah, or I can learn that all agree wooden flute is not an avodah. And either way, it makes sense, the argument whether wooden kalim or wooden vessels are sacred or not. And I'll give you two ways of learning. One way is as follows. Everyone agrees. Everyone agrees that when the Torah says that you should have music, everybody should sing it. Shira means musical instruments. So what's the argument here regarding? So we had a wooden flute. That's a keli. Yeah, but the question is, when it comes to the flute, you have absolutely no choice. There's no alternative. You have to leave it in wood if you want to have a good quality sound. And as the Gemara said, they coated it with gold, and it actually interfered. So they left it at wood. So they had no choice. And the argument is, so what about the ordinary vessels? You can use metal, you can use wood, different materials, gold. What should you do? Or copper. Should you then learn from the wooden instrument, because the fact is a wooden flute is a keli? Or do we say, look, they had no choice, but here you do have a choice. So that's the argument. Do you learn something? Do you draw parallel on something where, in the case we had no choice? Man, the Machshavon says he couldn't, that wooden savad done in Efshim. He holds that wooden kelim are good because we learned draw a parallel from the wooden flute, even though they had no choice. Who cares? The fact is that we use the wooden kelim. And the apostles are like, no, you cannot draw such parallels. That's all. They're not arguing about it, but everyone agrees that the flute was part of the service. That's one way of viewing it. Or if you want, everyone holds the other way around. Everyone holds that the flute definitely was not part of the service. News. If the flute was not part of the service, there's no precedent for wood. Why would anyone say? Why would everybody say you could use wooden cable? And the ain't done you don't learn something from a circumstance where you have no choice. Here, there's a totally different argument. They're arguing about a rule. When the Torah, we had this, we had a number of places. When you have a rule, when you have a generic expression, then a very specific, and then generic. We call that klal upratu klal. Do we view it as klal upratu klal, or do we view it as ribui miyat ribui? In a nutshell, klal includes everything. Comes along a prat. What's the role of the next word, which is specific? If your whole klal, the prat klal goes as follows. The prat comes to define the klal. That klal that I gave you, I don't mean it to be so expansive. Prat, only limited to exactly this prat. Ein b'chlal ela masha b'prat. So the prat is coming to define the klal. Then you have another klal afterwards that's coming to expand. So how far do we expand it? But we have a prat in the middle. So we expanded anything which is similar to the prat. Right? Klal, prat, klal, anything similar to the prat is included. But if that's one format of learning, which we say in Davening B'Shmuel says, there's another one, and that's called Ribui Umiyat and Ribui. It works like this. The Ribui includes everything. Comes along the Miyat, and the Ribui Miyat is just like Klal Prat Klal. The Miyat says, you know what? Only include things which are similar to the Miyat. So we're not limiting it to the Miyat. We're including anything which is similar to the Miyat. Then you have another riba afterwards. It comes to expand, to broaden the range. So we include everything except the one or two items that are so far away from the original klal, the other end of the spectrum, that's excluded. So in our case here, it says in the pasuk, Dorish argued, and Gemara says, over here, we learn from menorah the kind of vessels we use in the Mikdash, and they argue whether which kloli prata we can use a system of klal prat, or baribi emir. That's the argument. Rebbe Dorish kloli prati. Rebbe says he used the rule of klal prat. And Rabbi Yosef Yehuda says Dorish Yibim Mir. The Gemara explains. Rebbe Dorish klal prati. He says Vasisa menoiras. It says in the pasuk that you should make a menoiras. Right? It doesn't say what material, so it's a klal. It includes everything. Then it says in the pasuk with zav Torah, pure gold, which is very limiting. That's a prat. So you can only use gold. Then it says miksha te'asa hamanoida. We should make it one piece, but then it's a te'asa you should make it sound like you make from anything. So it's a klal, prat, a klal. Chazav ekol. Klal, uprat to klal, I atadoin. You don't rule ela ke'ena prat. Only that which is similar to the prat. Maha prat mefusha mafkas. I don't care if it's gold, whatever it is, but it's all made out of metal. That's a general material. Af kosher mafkas, anything made out of metal. So that's why they hold that wooden kalim won't work. Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, he says, Dorish, we do darshan ribui umid. That's the format we use. So let's use the same thing. But asisa menorah is it includes every kind of material, wood and everything else. Zahav Torah, gold is mir. It comes to a limit to what? Anything similar to gold. Maybe also only metals. Any metal, but only metals. Then miksha to asam menorah chazor riba comes to expand that range. Riba umid, riba hakel. It includes everything, including wood. My riba, my rabbi kol milin includes everything. So my miyat. The fact is we have a miyat. So one thing has to be excluded. What is the most remote thing? What is the most distant thing from gold? Miyat shel cheres. You know what are the limits? Clay. Clay is earthenware. Because it's so the opposite of gold. Gold is something dignified, elegant, and clay cheres is so mias. In fact, we call muktzah in Shabbos muktzah machas mias. So therefore, that's what's been left out. But wood can be used. So therefore, what we're saying to Rabbi Yosef is your explanation of whether a flute can be played on Yom Tov or not, on Shabbos or not, during B'Sir Beis Sheva, you gave an explanation. They're arguing whether it's an activity or not an activity, maybe, but the proof that you have is definitely not a proof because the other argument about wooden vessels has nothing to do with what the role is. Says the Gemara, Papa says, in fact, this Rabbi Yosef said, if the Ika Shira is the pet or Ika Shira Keli, I can tell you it's an argument between Tanoi. The Tanya we learned, Avdei Koyanim. When they used to play musical instruments by the carbon, who were the orchestra? Who were the members of the orchestra? What qualification? We know when it comes to the actual singing was Levim. What about the members of the orchestra? So Rabbi Meir says, Avdei Koyanim Hayu. In fact, they were servants. They were servants who were of the Koyanim, and they're the ones who play these musical instruments. Rabbi Yossi says, no, you did not use avodim at all. They only use Yisraelim, but not only Yisraelim, but Yisraelim distinguish Yisraelim. Mishpachas Beis Apgarim, they use a family called Beis Apgarim, or Mishpachas Beis Sipraya, and a family called Beis Sipraya, and from a city called Ma'amum, from the place called Ma'amum, Shahayim Masin Lekuna. We knew that they were all very worthy families, and they were suitable to marry into the Kohuna. So those Yisraelim we used to play, they were in the orchestra. Rabbi Chanim and Antigna said, not only didn't we use avodim, not only that, we also didn't use Israelim, because it says, Levim hayu, only be a Levi. Just like when it comes to the singing, it can only be a Levi, so too when it comes to play the musical instrument, the band was only a Levi. Now what's going on here? One opinion avodim, one opinion Israelim, Yuchasim, and one opinion Levim. My love, but Papa says maybe they're arguing the following. Man, avodim. One is with avodim how you somebody holds because the band, the orchestra didn't play a role at all. Doesn't have to be a kohen, doesn't have to be a Levi. Ika should have been the Levim's role was to sing. Therefore, we don't care about the musical, about the orchestra. They're just background. But a man Levim, but the other one was Sister Chanim and Tignan says it has to be Levim because he holds it's a part of that Avodah. Ika should have been musical instruments, and therefore have to be on Levim. So Ika should have been clean. Says how can it be? How you can explain the middle opinion? The middle opinion says no avodim, but doesn't have to be Levi, only Yisrael. So how do you explain? If he holds that it's Ikashira Bikli, then it should be only Levim. And if he holds it doesn't matter, then it should be even avodim. But Tizbur, Rabbi Yesi Mike, so what does he hold? That the main singing is vocal. Then I feel about Nami. Then what's wrong with Avodim playing musical instruments? And Ikas of Ikashir be clear. The Ikashir is with musical instruments. Levim Yisrael only Levim, not Yisraelim. Says Gemara, Lekuli Alma. Everyone holds Ikashir bepeh. Everyone holds that the Ikashir is vocal. Maybe everyone holds Ikashir is vocal. So what's the argument about musical instruments? A totally different argument. I'm just telling you what happened. One says, this is what I saw. It doesn't really matter who plays musical instruments. So therefore, I saw they used even servants. Someone said, I saw the music Israel. I saw music different times, different periods. They're not arguing in halacha. They're just talking facts. Says the Gemara, then why even argue? Who cares? The might have committed another matter. Because sometimes if you see a person behaving in a certain way, we can make assumptions. For example, if we see a person, we're going to have more exhibits there in the second page. If you see a person duchening in public on Shabbos or on Yom Tov, then you can surmise that this person is a kohen. And how far do we take it that he is only regarding marriage or also regarding collecting truma? The Gemara will discuss that. So if Mailin meduchen to a yuchsin and so on. So the same thing here. If you saw somebody playing a musical instrument in the Beis Hamikdash, what assumptions did we make? And that's the argument here. The argument is there's two things about Levim. First of all, there's two things we always worried about. First of all, can they eat meiser? Only a Levi can eat meiser, the 10%. Another thing is, can he marry, let's say, a kohen without having to bother checking out the whole family? So that's the argument here. The one says, the argument, if you see them standing on the platform of the Beis Hamikdash, can you automatically surmise that they can marry anybody? Because they're definitely a miyuchas, and they're allowed to marry a kohen, and regarding meiser. So the Gemara says, that's the argument. The one who says, avodim hayu, that they were just slave or servant. Obviously, he held halachically, just because you saw them performing on the platform, we didn't make any assumptions about their status, and therefore it doesn't matter. That's what he's trying to say. In other words, what he's really saying is we don't make any assumptions on anybody's status just because they play musical instruments. And how does he say that? By suggesting that even avodim were able to play. So in other words, it means nothing. However, Mandam Yisrael, the one who says no, that they weren't avodim, but they could be Yisrael, he says when you saw people playing musical instruments, it only helped us insofar as the status regarding marriage, but not regarding ma'aseh. That was the Yisrael could do it. So he holds but not for ma'aseh. Mandam Levima, the one who said that was actually Levima who played musical instruments. He says if you saw anybody on the platform, you could automatically assume some of Mailin Meduchin, Bein Liyuchs, you can marry any kohen, and Bein Meiser, or you can marry, or he can go ahead and get Meiser. Okay, so this is the first answer we have in the Gemara. Tomorrow we'll see the Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Abba who argues Rabbi Yosef. But Rabbi Yosef wants to say the discussion here as to whether Rabbi Yosef ben Yehuda, whether he says he could play musical instrument, the flute, on Shabbos itself, and the Chum says he can't, is arguing about whether the flute is considered avoda ein shil bekeli or ein shil bepeh, or the flute is there only as a background. As the background doesn't push away Shabbos at all. But if it's pivotal and so on, then it does push away Shabbos. And he's talking about, and he said that the whole argument is only regarding playing music when it comes to a carbon. But there it's an avodah, and there, we need to play musical instruments, that's part of the avodah. But when it comes to playing musical instruments for the Sukah Daf, there's no question, there's no argument, there's no discussion that you cannot do that on Shabbos because it's only Simcha Yisera, it's not an avodah at all. What right do we have to play on Shabbos? We see tomorrow, Rabbi Rabba completely argues with that, and he says that the argument is dafke by Simcha Beis Sheva. But when it comes to the carbon, everyone agrees you played even on Shabbos and on Yom Tov because that's part of the avodah, as we'll see tomorrow. So everyone have a good day.
What's this about the